Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the May meeting of the Lextran Board of Directors. To lead our meeting this morning is our board chair, Mr. Harding Dowell.
Thank you, Fred. We will call the meeting to order and we will call the roll. Mr. Ward.
Present.
Ms. Rogers.
Present.
Mr. Schoninger.
Here.
Ms. Borges-Gonzalez.
I'm here.
Okay, and looks like Judge Thurston is absent, and that is everybody on the board right now. So, not for long. But we do have quorum, so we will continue ahead with the approval of the minutes. Sorry, I've skipped over public comment. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to our agenda. Approval of the minutes from April 2025. Has everyone had a chance to review, and are there any comments or edits? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Schoninger. Thank you, Mr. Ward. Is a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. We have a full agenda today, so I'll skip the chair's report and move directly into our general manager's report.
Thank you, Chair. For the Transit Center renovation update, we are well through demo, and we do have a couple of items in our change order report that I'll talk about when we get there. Some issues that we found during demo that we need to resolve. So we'll touch on those when we get to our change order report.
No surprises surprises. All right. We'll move on to our guest today, Mr. George Meyer from Nelson Nygaard, who will provide an update on the microtransit feasibility study. Mr. Meyer.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. The slides there, that's great. I'm going to talk about the microtransit feasibility study. And so let's jump right in. Next slide. So today, for our slides, we'll give an overall update on the project and kind of get into what microtransit is and how it differs from other forms of transit. Then we'll talk about some of the big components of the project, including case studies we conducted, existing conditions, and then finally how we've been developing recommendations. Next slide. So as I just mentioned, we'll start off with where we are in the project. Next slide. The microtransit feasibility, yep, there we go. We kicked off in November last year, and the first couple of months were focused on data collection and identifying potential case studies. From there, we conducted interviews of peer systems with microtransit programs. Much of that time was also spent on analyzing Lextran's existing system and conducting a microtransit-specific market analysis. We've also been conducting community engagement activities such as stakeholder meetings and a survey to get public feedback on perception. And then recommendations development began in March and should be wrapped up soon, ending with a final report next month. Next slide. So now we'll get into answering some of the questions on like what is microtransit, talk a little bit about like how it differs from other modes. And so here we have 4 modes of transportation, starting with fixed route on the far left. Fixed route buses are the most efficient type of bus service, meaning that they can move a lot of passengers for the amount of money it costs to operate the service. Fixed route buses are efficient because they typically travel along major corridors into activity centers and along like higher density development where they pick up and drop off a high number of riders. Next we have ride hail, which is another mode of transportation and in some cases can even be kind of considered transit as well. Usually ride hail is operated by a company like an Uber or Lyft, I'm sure as you all are familiar with, and it's sort of similar to taxis. The difference is that ride hail companies leverage dispatching technology that make trip booking possible through smartphone apps, making requesting and booking trips very convenient. Another important point here is that ride hail is not ADA accessible, meaning that they do not accommodate passengers with mobility impairments, which is something that transit agencies are required to do. ADA paratransit is another mode of transit. In Lexington, the ADA service is branded as Wheels. ADA paratransit is available to riders who cannot take the Lextran fixed route bus service because of a disability. Wheels will take eligible riders from their origin to their destination anywhere in Fayette County, but requires a reservation made the day before. And then finally, microtransit is a transit service that leverages that trip dispatching technology from ride-hail companies, so passengers can book a trip on their smartphone and get picked up, usually within about 15 or 20 minutes, and taken to their destination as long as it's within a relatively small microtransit zone. It's a very flexible service, but it also becomes less efficient and more expensive as ridership grows. And lastly, microtransit must include ADA accessible vehicles to account for those riders that may need those accommodations. Next slide. So there are a lot of different options when operating microtransit service. One of them is what we call the service design model. Basically, the service design model dictates how passengers can use the service. Like if a passenger can be picked up and dropped off anywhere in the zone, or if one or both of those locations need to be at a designated location. The anywhere to anywhere model on the left gives passengers the most flexibility, but is also the least efficient. On the other side, the hub to hub model gives passengers less flexibility, but is the most efficient. Next slide. So now we have a kind of a shared idea of what microtransit is. We'll talk about some of the things we learned by talking to agency peers. And so our case studies included 6 programs from 5 different agencies, and we intentionally used microtransit programs that were different in key ways, so we would learn about different applications. 2 programs were actually partnerships with ride-hail companies, and the other 4 were more like those traditional microtransit programs. And of the microtransit programs, there were 2 that operated in-house and 2 that contracted out to a third party, so we felt like we were getting good examples from kind of a diverse group of programs. We talked to each agency about the purpose and use case of the program, and all recorded beginning the project as a pilot. They also all implemented microtransit in areas that they felt were not suitable for other transit services like fixed route because of things like low density environment, for instance. We also heard from agencies how important it was to coordinate microtransit with other services so they worked together rather than competed against one another. Next slide. We also talked to agencies about how they funded their microtransit programs. So funding really typically came from the same sources as other services, which was a mix of usually local, state, and federal funding. Local funding came from a few different places, like local governments, like the local MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, or state DOT. We also saw examples from funding from local businesses, like corporations, and then examples of community colleges too. Fairs were also part of the funding picture, but typically a very small part. And 2 programs didn't charge fares at all. Other agencies charged a premium for fares, which include one example charging $3.50 per trip, so quite a range. Next slide. We also asked specifically about outcomes of the programs. One topic that came up over and over was capacity. Agencies emphasized that microtransit could quickly become overwhelmed if demand spikes, which can lead to long wait times and denied trip requests. Agencies also recommended limiting demand by making strategic choices in how services kind of set up. So like things like fare policy and zone size, and like what I talked about earlier with the service design models, they suggested that it's easier to increase demand than figure out what to do with demand after it's already too high. We also heard that education is really important, and to expect a learning curve for both the passengers and staff. Next slide. So in addition to the case studies, we also did quite a bit of analysis on the existing transit network and the markets to learn more about how microtransit could be applied specifically to Lexington. There are a lot of different types of maps and analysis based in the existing service and market assessment, but I think a lot of it can be boiled down to these 3 maps you see here. The first thing we needed to do was understand how the existing service is distributed throughout the service area. Map on the left shows no or low service in red and orange, and then high amounts of service in blue and purple. And the middle map shows where transit demand is in Lexington. The tan represents population with low transit demand, and the red represents population with high transit demand. So finally, the map on the far right shows a combination of those two. And the reason that so much of the map is blank is because the areas that are currently served well with transit we took those out, they're removed. So what's left is the level of need for transit among areas that currently have low or no transit service. And so that helps us with identifying those mobility gaps for microtransit. Next slide. So now we'll talk about how all of this kind of helps to create actual recommendations. Next slide. And so before we get into the zones themselves, I wanted to run through a handful of best practices for designing microtransit. The first thing we need to make sure of is that microtransit service is built to complement existing services. So microtransit works well if it connects to fixed routes with high ridership anchor points. We also want to make sure that we're not designing a zone that just shifts riders from the fixed routes over to the microtransit. We also know that microtransit zones should have a mix of locations and trip types. You want to cover an area that has as many different types of locations as possible. So, include housing, jobs, shopping, medical, all of those things. You also want to limit the zone size because larger zones can create much longer trips. Shorter trips on microtransit are more efficient, and 5 square miles for a zone size is generally a good rule of thumb. Designing a zone size that requires 2 vehicles is also generally a good idea because trip dispatching is more efficient with 2 vehicles compared to 1. You also want to create a zone that's easy to understand so riders are more likely to try it. Next slide. Including those best practices, we end up with a lot of information to guide us in creating potential zones. So we rely on things like the lessons learned and the case studies and the transit gaps from the existing conditions. We also had staff workshops, stakeholder engagement, public survey to learn more about what everyone wanted in the community. Next slide. So we end up using all of this information to create a series of zones around Lexington that covers those transit gaps, adhering to best practices and satisfying those mobility needs. We also know, however, that the funding is limited, and some zones are going to offer more to the public than others. So we took these 6 zones and went through a screening process that evaluates each zone based on that list on the left that you see, including population and jobs, access to services, connections to fixed routes, and so forth. And through this process, we identified a zone that shows particularly strong potential for microtransit. Next slide. And so the map on the right shows this identified zone, but before we get into exactly why this zone performs well, I did want to say that each of the zones from this previous map did have merit. And depending on those specific things that you're looking for, specific problems you're trying to solve, zone recommendations can vary. And so, if you're interested in our final report, we'll have a lot more on the evaluation of each zone independently. But with that said, the northwest zone, which goes from Versailles Road to Newtown Pike, performs really well on a number of criteria. One of the things that helps set this zone apart is the economic opportunity. There are a lot of jobs throughout this area that aren't covered well by fixed route. So covering with microtransit fills a lot of gaps. It also covers healthcare well with service to the VA hospital and a dialysis clinic. The demographic makeup of the zone, particularly the percentage of low-income households, also suggests that microtransit would perform well. There are also good opportunities to connect to the fixed route network and opportunities for future growth because the area is growing. Next slide. The cost to operate the service is a big part of what makes service feasible or not as well. So we made some assumptions on what service could look like so we could get a better idea of how much it would cost. So here we're assuming microtransit is in service for 14 hours a day from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. And using 2 vehicles the entire time would come out to 28 daily revenue, our vehicle hours. We're also assuming that the service is consistent 7 days a week throughout the entire year, and then using a cost per hour of $95 for a turnkey service, which is based on our case studies analysis. So by using these assumptions, the service comes out to about $970,000 annually. There are also administrative costs that the agency needs to consider, which increase the total cost for the first year service to be about $1,170,000. Next slide. We also estimated ridership to calculate performance metrics, and given the demographics and service hours of the zone, ridership could come up to about 19,500 riders a year. And in terms of fare revenue, that would generate about just shy of like $60,000 a year. Fares are priced at about $3 a trip. And then at the bottom, you can see that passengers per hour would be 1.9, cost per passenger would be a little less than 60. Fare box recovery ratio ends up being about 5%. Next slide. So one of the most important considerations is how the service would be funded too. And this can be categorized into federal, local, and regional. Federal funding can come as FDA formula funding or from competitive grants. And local and regional funding can come from local government, ballot initiatives, local partnerships, advertising, and as we talked about, fares. And it's likely that funding would come from a mix of all or most of those sources, I'd say. Next slide. Implementation of a microtransit service really comes down to goals and funding. The questions are, does microtransit align with agency goals, and can it be funded? And if the answer is yes, then I think microtransit is likely feasible. You'd want to start with a pilot that hopefully is at least a year or two long to let that service mature and also learn as much as you can. You also want to be careful not to overpromise and underdeliver, which seems to be easier to do with microtransit than some of the more traditional transit modes. It's also a good idea to wait to make changes to the fixed drop network until you know that microtransit service is permanent to avoid changing service on passengers kind of over and over. Next slide. So what conclusions should be drawn from all of this? Like what do I want everyone to walk away with here? I really think like the biggest thing would be that microtransit has the benefits and drawbacks. And depending on what problem you're trying to solve, microtransit may or may not be the tool to get where you want to go. One thing microtransit does very well is fill in service gaps in places where fixed drop service is ineffective because of things like low density. Microtransit is also incredibly flexible. It can pick someone up right at their house and drop them off right at their job, as long as those places are within that microtransit zone. Microtransit is also flexible in terms of timing. A lot of times it can pick passengers up within like 15 or 20 minutes of requesting a ride, as long as service levels are aligned well with demand. And then microtransit also has drawbacks though, which sometimes makes it the wrong choice in certain environments. For instance, the estimated cost per trip in our analysis shows that microtransit is very expensive per person, so using it for large numbers of people or large numbers of riders is inefficient. And related to this is that microtransit has upper limits to the number of passengers per hour it can carry. The most productive program from our case studies was also one of the most productive zones actually in the entire country, and that was averaging 5 to 6 passengers per hour. And most microtransit programs fall within kind of that 2 to 3 passengers per hour range. Some programs even less so, and these numbers are kind of roughly in line with Lextran's ADA parachute service of about 2 passengers per hour, and much lower than Lextran's core fixed drop service, which I looked up is about approximately 22 passengers per hour. So again, in the right context, microtransit can be a great benefit to the community, but its limitations, those do need to be acknowledged and it should be applied in a kind of a proper environment set up with careful policies to give it the best chance of success. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Appreciate that. I know I have a couple of questions, but I'd like others to ask theirs first.
Is the 5975 That's just one way, right? So if somebody goes to somewhere and then comes back, it's $120?
Yes.
That's correct, yep. Yeah, cost per passenger trip. I could add in trip at the end of that metric to make it a little more clear. It's a good question.
But was there any magic to the 6 zones as to the size of them? So like this one that you focused on, do you have to do that whole thing, or could you do half of it?
I mean, zones, we through over like the past couple of months, there were, dozens of iterations of zones. And it's, kind of a process of looking at everything that we've learned, over the course of this study and trying to grab those areas with high demand, and grab those areas that look like they could and would use the service, demographics, and looking at the fixed route ridership as well. And then also aligning with major roads helps a lot. But I mean, there you can always kind of, and this is something that we saw with through the case studies of, agencies would pilot a zone, and over time that zone might change a little bit because there was a lot of requests from a neighborhood just outside of the zone. They went back and did some more analysis and figured that it wouldn't impact service, to expand that zone. So these zones are and could be somewhat fluid in that they could change over time. But to kind of answer your question, they are flexible enough that you can, in some cases, trim back. I'd want to refer back to the data to make sure that those modifications still make sense. But these zones I don't think are set in stone. I feel good about them, but they could be modified a little bit. Sure.
Let me add something to that. George, the size of the zone is roughly based on what we think 2 vehicles can accommodate. And the cost of the service is driven by the number of vehicles that we supply in every zone. So that's how those things sort of fit together. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, in our southeast zone, there really wasn't kind of that larger zone, the further south, that I think requires more than 2 vehicles. And there's just, in going through the analysis, there wasn't a great break point for that zone, so it is on the larger side, and it does end up being it's the most expensive too. But generally, 2 vehicles per zone is a great rule of thumb. You generally don't want to design a zone that only has 1, because the dispatching can become inefficient that way. But I agree with that, Fred.
So if somebody works downtown and they're in the northwest zone, we just take them to where the line stops?
To a bus stop. Yes.
So what you want to do is create anchor points, and we don't have those shown, but for each of these zones, you'd want to create, locations that encourage passengers to connect to the fixed route. And there's that Kroger along the 12 that would be a good opportunity. You don't necessarily want to bring folks to the edge of the zone. You want to encourage them to go to just a handful of locations like grocery stores or high activity places where then they would transfer to the fixed route network to make their way downtown.
So George, which service model? I remember you showed sort of 3 or 4 options. Which are we imagining for this pilot zone?
I think there are merits of each. I kind of prefer the anywhere to anywhere, as long as as you go down the list of kind of decisions, a ultimately that round out a complete zone. You don't want to make it, put yourself in a position where demand is too great. So anywhere to anywhere, I think, is the most flexible and gives passengers the greatest flexibility and options on how to use the service. It's also one of the more, it creates more demand. So you do need to be more careful about how large that zone is. So as long as those decisions are, other decisions are made carefully. So like, you wouldn't want to design a zone that's anywhere to anywhere and, zero fare or very low cost fare. Something like that could get you in a position where demand is a little bit too high. One of the examples that we saw that did have zero fare in the case studies, that was a hub-to-hub model that they were restricting, where passengers could go as part of that overall capacity analysis. So I do like the anywhere to anywhere model because it does afford a lot of flexibility for those passengers, so long as we're careful and not creating too much demand.
Okay. So how does an anywhere to anywhere really work with the idea of connecting people to the fixed route? Because if you're just going anywhere to anywhere, the likelihood that their destination within that zone is going to be a fixed route stop is lower than if we're doing hub to hub or anywhere to hub. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I think what we would do is, and as you saw, we were pricing the fares at a little bit more on like the premium side, so $3. But then, we would hopefully on the technology side, we still need to figure that the nuts and bolts out of that, but provide free transfers. And so that incentivizes folks to take the microtransit service, transfer to those fixed routes, and ultimately provide a longer, more trip to they could go across Lexington if they wanted for that $3.
When you did your comparative case studies, what are the most common use cases that you saw from these other programs? I would have my own assumptions about whether they're commute trips or whether they're sort of daily errand trips. Like, what did you see in your study?
So in terms of use case for from the agency perspective, it was a lot of times more about covering areas that were just difficult to serve with fixed route. Now, fixed route doesn't do everything perfectly, and so a lot of times they were covering up areas that otherwise wouldn't be able to serve with fixed route. So, but on the passenger's perspective, which I think what you're asking about more, would be a lot of trips to go shopping, to go to jobs, just like any other trip. We did see a higher than normal reporting of students using the service. We've seen that in a number of locations actually, that younger folks figure out, there's this new microtransit service and they jump on it. High schoolers, we saw a couple instances of lots and lots of student ridership. So hopefully, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so, as best we can.
George, I was wondering if you could expand on the community engagement that you entertained. Did you guys talk to Build at all, or?
Yes, we did. So I think I prefer if Greg, do you want to speak to this one?
I can help answer that.
Okay.
Yeah, so we engaged with many stakeholders, including Build. We had several meetings with them, both individually and then as a larger group. Elected officials, sort of representatives from organizations that we work with frequently, right? So Kentucky Refugee Ministries, things of that nature. We also did a community survey, and so that went out. It is by no means statistically valid. It does not say, the people of Lexington say this, but we got a lot of good feedback that still is important, right? And some of that was, I think particularly if you isolate our riders, those that use the service today, what we learned is that they would really prefer us to invest in our system, right? To find more efficiencies within the fixed route system. But generally, the feedback was, this seems like a good idea, let's try it, and that people would be interested in the service.
specifically about build, what did you get from their input?
Build, has, they come to you with a solution, right? And so their
Right.
solution is very much that we should do a turnkey operation with a software provider, some of which, George's, Nygaard's work supports as well. They are really into the anywhere to anywhere model. They do not want to do first mile, last mile. And, I think it's been a good experience.
Okay.
We've learned a lot from each other over the past year. I feel like things have been good between us. But yeah, the feedback is largely unchanged from what I think they've informed Lextran, over the past couple of years.
I have a few questions.
Mm-hmm.
What's the most common funding model of the ones that you looked at? I know you listed the models, but which one's the most common, and is it a percentage and a combination of different funding models?
Well, in terms of funding model, all of them were a mix. So they, except for partnerships with ride-hail companies, that's kind of the big exception there. All of them did receive a mix of federal, state, and local. The ride-hail partnerships, those are a little bit more difficult to get federal funding for. So we saw a couple of those examples just not even, that were 100% locally funded. That was kind of the exception there.
When you say ride hail, what does that mean?
Uber.
Yeah.
So, yeah, ride-hail
Ride-hail
was,
via.
so Uber and Lyft, some agencies do partner with Uber and Lyft to provide a service similar to like a microtransit service.
Right.
And
Right.
so what you would have is the transit agency subsidizing essentially those trips. So it could be a 100% coverage, or some transit agencies will provide like an up to $5 discount for a ride-hail trip. So essentially, you could work with Uber or Lyft to
Yeah, I got it, but that's almost
a-
all locally funded.
Okay.
Right, you were saying that's almost all
Those were
local.
Yep. Yes, because of the complications with trying to get federal funding for those types of programs. Yeah, we saw 100% local there.
And you mean local government funded or the local transit agency funded?
Local transit agency funded. Yeah, so which comes from like a mix of sorts. So depending on how the overall funding works for that agency, it could be sales tax, property tax generated, various sources.
Yep. And so then you said all of the ones are a mix of federal, state, and local. Is it
That's
that
right.
you
Yeah.
looked at? And is it primarily one of those sources, like primarily federal with state and local second? Or is there a primary?
Gosh, it varies from agency to agency that way. Yeah, so I mean, it varies significantly from state to state. Some states are much more aggressive or conservative for funding their transit agency.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, do you know, like, what percentage of transit agencies have a microtransit? And I'm just looking for a t-shirt size, like, on average, about 25% of a transit authorities have a microtransit, or 50%, not looking for an actual, but just where's the industry going in terms of having a microtransit?
The best way I can answer that is that it has been growing significantly. I couldn't give you a number. I don't know, maybe my colleague Bill Schwartz could give kind of a guesstimate there, but it has been growing between now and even like 5 years ago. Through COVID, microtransit really saw a lot of growth. But it's becoming more and more common.
Yeah, I would just add that, hi everybody, I'm Bill Schwartz with North Nygaard. I mean, it's certainly a popular topic of discussion. It does not make up a lot of the service that's delivered. You think about
Yeah.
fixture, bus, and rail systems, it's still a very small share. What is happening that is interesting to watch is that the companies that develop the software for microtransit are now beginning to deliver paratransit services, or the agencies are hiring those companies to provide the software. So the opportunity to do the dynamic dispatching that you get in microtransit is broadening, and where I see this going is that's the likely place where agencies will begin to see the benefits of these better platforms. But the reality, as I'm sure you all know, is that when you have a driver in a vehicle and you're only carrying 2 passengers an hour, there's no way getting around how expensive it is. And so what George talked about, all the transit agencies are looking at this and saying, okay, it's a small part of our service because we can't afford to do it broadly, and our business really is primarily running buses, carrying more people. So that's, but I think we've also seen, I was just at the applicability conference, and there were several presentations more on sort of the technology side, and there was one on the lesson learned side, and there's a retrenchment going on as well. Agencies have tried it, and then have sort of redesigned it because they can't sustain it, either because they have to keep adding vehicles to meet the demand, or they just don't have the ability to meet the performance standards that you've seen out there, where as George said, the idea of under-promising and over-delivering is kind of where things are headed, as opposed to a lot of agencies that over-promise and then can't meet the demand because the people are asking for more trips than they can afford to deliver. I hope that helps you.
Yeah, that's helpful. Well, then I'll ask another question, and I have a different question. So then what you've seen, I think capacity was that one of your concerns, or one of the unintended consequences. And so what does that look like? That means you've got people now expecting that they get a ride, but now they're really waiting significant amount of hours because it's so popular. Is that what that means when you're saying capacity?
Yes. So the outcome would be that
I'll say that you deny trips.
yeah.
That happens a lot, or those longer wait times.
Yep.
Yes, basically. Yeah, so we saw organizations that would cut it off after 30 minutes, right? So if your wait time exceeds 30 minutes or 45 minutes, they just automatically, you can't request a ride at that point, which obviously creates unhappy customers.
It's become so popular, the demand's so high, you're denying trips. Okay? And then for the ones that did a pilot, how long did they do it to do a successful pilot? So long enough to market it, to get the data, to do it, to run it? Like, was the average, I see what your proposal here is a year. Is that about 3 years?
2 to 3.
2 to 3.
Yeah.
Is that the proposal that you saw in most of the pilots?
I think most of the pilots were at least a year. I would, if you can, even longer would be preferable. Just like a lot of these services that, agencies won't even evaluate them until 6 months. It takes a while to get them up and running.
Yep.
And it takes riders time to get used to it, and staff to understand, the nuts and bolts, and there are things to be worked out along the way. And so I'd say at least a year, preferably 2 or so, yeah.
And I think one of the things that we saw in the case studies, and one of the things that we've highlighted about the service, is the flexibility. One of the challenges with the flexibility is the need to evaluate and make changes. And so as your demand increases, you have to make a change to control that demand. Okay, we've made a change, and now we're under where we would like to be. So there's a lot of data analysis, there's a lot of tracking and ensuring that you're doing. So if we did that for 6 months and we make 2 changes, do we really have a good picture versus if we did it for 3 years and we make very concerted efforts periodically for strong evaluation and changes. And also, there's a huge marketing piece involved in all of this. If people don't know or understand how it works, we heard this from our case studies as well, education is so important, because if it is not immediately intuitive the second you look to it, it's dismissed, right? So there's a sort of a lagging effort. You can put a lot on the front end, but then when people start hearing about it from their friend or their neighbor, there's still that education piece and that ongoing did you know? And then as you make changes, there's another education piece. And so the wonderful thing about flexibility is that it exists. The horrible thing about flexibility is the constant refinement necessary to create a successful program. And then perhaps you have brand new demand that crops up because you have a new affordable housing complex that's just outside your zone. So the longer pilot is really to provide that, is it interest, is it use, how, you know, what is the point of the pilot? Is it just to see if people are interested in it, and what does that look like, and how do you measure success? But to know if the program is really successful, we felt like 2 to 3 years is the best way to do it, much longer term than shorter.
Absolutely. So that's the end of my questions. I just want to make a few points that I saw in the presentation. I think there was a really good point on lessons learned about not cannibalizing the current trip. So are we actually creating net new riders, or are we just shifting riders to a more convenient service at a higher cost, at a less efficient cost? I thought that was a very interesting point. So thanks for pointing that out. And then I think to your point on the public feedback is that we're hearing that on average, our riders would like us to find a more efficient, of our current system. You said it more eloquently than
So,
I'm saying it,
yeah, I think-
but
I mean, I've only been here for a year, but what I've heard from Fred forever, right, is that every time we ask a rider what they want, they say frequency. They want the bus to come more often, and that's what we heard in the survey as well.
so I thought that was interesting. And then will you go back to your slide that was, I think, lessons learned? It was the one that was about cannibalizing. It had the word. This one. And I think this was around yours, the zone size was really interesting. Because I immediately was kind of surprised by the zone size. I thought, oh, these are really big zones, but it sounds like there's a lot of logic to the zones. And then to me, 2 vehicles seemed not enough vehicles. I just assumed that microtransit had more than just 2 vehicles, but I don't know that there's a lot of logic behind that. And then, so we're saying this zone is $1 million on average, plus the administration cost, so 1.1 times 2 years, so we're looking at 2.4 million. Is that comparable for all the zones, or that's only the cost of this zone?
Only the cost of that zone.
Okay.
But you're in the range of all of the zones that require 2 vehicles. The exception would be that southernmost zone that we have looked at 3 vehicles. Is that fair, George?
Yep, that's right.
So it might be a little different up or down, but essentially you can think of that as a good rule of thumb.
That was
the 2 vehicles is definitely like what I would recommend in almost all cases, at least 2 vehicles. There are certainly times of the day, like, I don't know, Sunday evening, you might be able to transition to 1 vehicle for a few hours. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be 2 vehicles all the time. There are little areas that you could trim back, but generally, yeah, you want to put those 2 vehicles out there for the full time.
Did the case study talk about peak demand times? I mean, is it really, was their demand primarily, heavy drive time, or was it spread throughout the day?
It kind of varied within the agencies that we talked to. Some of them had heavy school trips. Some of them there was one example that had a higher than what you would expect, like what I would call a leisure trip, like trips to the park. Those that heavily influenced the demand. So that was kind of an interesting, unique case study there. But the timing of demand, also correlates to what types of trips are happening, I guess I would say. So Yeah.
So one question I had is, talking about frequency and talking about connections to fixed route, I'm not certain that I know the headways on all of those routes, but a broad generalization is that our routes have headways of anywhere from 35 to 60 minutes. Correct? Yeah. And so if one of the goals of a microtransit system is to connect people to the fixed route system, our lack of frequency, in my mind, would create these very specific spikes, because if you're trying to get to a fixed route stop, you're only able to get to that fixed route stop every 35 or 70 minutes, which means that your vehicles are very, very busy for a small period of time, and then not busy at all. So I guess the question is, did the case study programs that you looked at experience that same sort of very volatile demand, or did they have strategies to spread out the demand?
I think one of the best strategies for dealing with that type of issue is, kind of goes back to having a diverse trip type. And so you not only want to connect folks to the fixed route ridership, but or to the fixed routes, but you also, some of the agencies told us that every zone they designed, it's got to have a grocery store, and you need some a variety of trip types where some riders are getting to school in the morning, others are going on their daily errands to do their shopping, others are connecting into the fixed route network because they need to go further within the city. I think balancing the type of trips is the best formula for dealing with that one type of issue. I will say that there was one example in Des Moines actually that there was the TNC partnership, or Ride-Hail partnership, excuse me, where they did see that issue. They designed a zone that was specifically to connect riders to the express network. And so you did have a lot of riders trying to get trips to the connection point to the express routes all at once, and they definitely were having issues, and also somewhat in part because it was a ride-hail partnership, and those trips were very early in the morning, and they just didn't have enough drivers, and that was an issue. So I think the solution there is planning for that demand and having a diverse set of trip types.
That sounds like the very issue that we have with our paratransit system right now. Any other questions? Does anybody run this? And I may be proposing something that's not microtransit, so just cut me off if that's the case. But it seems like there's a scenario in which this could be useful in an area with limited car ownership and limited low density, to essentially create sort of neighborhood circulator service. Is anybody in the industry or in the case study group using it in that function, or is that kind of a different thing? Where you talk about having grocery store, you talk about having daily errand service, and is anybody using this essentially to create a hub to hub, essentially a fixed route loop within one of these low service areas?
You described what I would absolutely call like a microtransit service. When we're on a project right now where we're replacing circulators with microtransit service. So instead of a circulator coming once an hour on a fixed schedule, or in some cases in every hour and a half, they're swapping that service out with a couple microtransit vehicles, and it does cost more, but the service is much better. And your point to the zero-car household, that is absolutely one of the evaluation criteria that we lean on heavily. That's one of the best indicators of transit use is, does do folks have access to a vehicle? And if not, much more likely to use transit.
Any other questions for Mr. Meyer? George and Bill, we really appreciate the time. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.
I have just a logistics question. Are we required to now present this report back to the MPO or any other organizations?
We will bring this report back to the city council next week.
Okay, and you're presenting that, is it,
George will be here as well.
okay. Is it to the full city council or is it to a committee?
It's full city council, but
It's a work
it's
session.
at work session.
I don't believe any further action on this item. We'll move to the monthly performance report and financials.
Okay. So, and I just want to thank Gregory Butler for his work on this as well. He's done an excellent job of sort of working behind the scenes and doing a lot of the planning and coordinating and making sure the massive data requests are fulfilled and that sort of thing. So just wanted to say how much we appreciate the work that he's done as well. So we will be presenting today the performance report for April.
Emily, before you start,
Sorry.
I didn't realize this. We have some time constraints on board members, and I want us to move into action items so that we can get those done. So I apologize to have you start and stop. But we'll move forward into item resolution 2025-12, the meeting schedule.
All right, resolution 2025-12 adopts our meeting schedule for next fiscal year. Our meeting times remain the fourth Wednesday at 10 a.m. Here in our boardroom, with the exception of the November and December meetings that will be on the third Wednesday to avoid the holidays. Also included in this resolution are the Finance Committee meeting times, which we've not done that before, but we'll go ahead and get those on the books here as well. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those now.
If there are no questions, is there a motion to approve resolution 2512?
Motion to,
Thank you, Jamie. We'll consider yours a second. Paul, all in favor?
All right.
Thank you.
Our next resolution is 2025-13, which is a resolution to amend the Lextran Employees Contributory Pension Plan. This came out of our last pension committee meeting. And what this amendment would do is to clarify and standardize the moment with which employees begin their employee contributions to the pension plan. Over the years and through several collective bargaining agreements, the time with which a member of the collective bargaining unit would begin their contributions differs from when an administration employee would begin their contributions. So the committee thought that it would be fair to align those to be 90 calendar days after the start days, regardless of what your status as an employee is. So that's what this amendment would do. And was there a correction that needed to be made? Are we good?
On the second page of that, or the amendment page, it says amendment 2 was done in whatever the date was, should be 2020. Was the title.
Okay. So we will fix that with the amendment. It's here. Do we have any questions on this amendment?
So what is it now?
Currently now, if you're a member of the collective bargaining unit, you come off probation after 720 working hours,
Oh,
which
instead of days.
instead of days, and you don't know, you could work a little longer, you could be a little shorter, and you still get the same benefit. So that year of work, regardless of your actual contribution, you still get the same benefit as anyone else. So this aligns everybody to contribute the same and to start at the same time.
So do the union employees are aware that you're
This came out of the pension committee, which is made up of half union and half management.
And Paul, you sit on that committee, correct?
Yes, sir.
So this was supported by all
And
parties?
it was actually brought up by one of the union members.
And the correction is on page 21 of your board packet. It says the second paragraph has Amendment 2 was effective January 1st, 2014. That date should be August 19th, 2020.
Okay.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the resolution as amended?
So moved.
Thank you, Paul. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jamie. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Thank you. 2025-14.
2025-14 is a resolution requesting the authority to purchase 4 paratransit cutaway vehicles. This is based on our Kentucky Public Transit Association bid number 11, so the same vehicle that we've used to purchase paratransit vehicles in previous board meetings. The funding for this purchase comes from our 5310 funds. Our portion of the directly authorized 5310 funding with the local match as outlined in the memo. Any questions on this resolution?
When did we expect delivery?
Have we got on the ones that we bought last month, that we didn't, those are coming in?
120 to 180 days.
190, so it should be about the same with this purchase too.
Gotcha. Okay. Any questions? Motion to approve? Thank you, George. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Paul. All in favor?
I second.
Thanks, lady. All in favor?
Aye.
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 So now, before we let Lady go, let's go into closed session and
Yep.
At this time, I move the Lextran Board go into closed session pursuant to KRS 61-810, Section G, for discussion regarding the provision of an agency contract.
motion in a second.
Oh, sorry. Jamie moved. Is there a second? George, thank you. All in favor?
Emily and Nikki. Who's here? we are back.
The Lextran board took no action during the closed session and will proceed with the planned agenda items.
Thank you, Jamie. We'll go back to our performance report and financials.
Okay, perfect. So we are going to review the performance report for April, and we will start with our mission statement. We serve people and our community with mobility solutions. April was a busy time. Several of our Lextran team members attended the Apta Mobility Conference in Austin, Texas, where operator Michael Burnett achieved 4th place in the International Bus Rodeo. On April 2nd, we hosted a microtransit information session, and that was the launch of our community survey. We started construction of the interior of the transit center on April 10th, and all operations were relocated to High Street. And then on the 28th, in cooperation with the Senior Services Commission, we offered a Learn to Ride session for senior center participants. And that was great. And the photo you see here is our Doing Business with Lextran event that we had on the 24th. And so staff members Deanna East, Becky Lane, and Tazaya Bakara facilitated that for us. So moving on to ridership, we did have an increase in ridership, I'm sorry, excuse me, in April. And not quite at our previous year, but an increase over what we've been seeing. So when we looked at that, there was an increase on the weekday ridership, and a bit of a change in sort of, we've seen this a couple of times over the last year with the UK schedule. Students were on campus an extra week, I believe, this year. So that gave a weekday bump. We ended the month with just over 305,000 trips, and at 17.75 trips per hour for April. For safety, there were 7 preventable accidents in April. There's one correction that is not in your board packet. The days with no preventable accidents was listed as 30, with the fiscal year to date as 258. That was an error that's going to be corrected for the record. There were 23 days with no preventable accidents, and there were no workers' compensation claims for the month. Maintenance operated 9,459 miles between road calls in April. We did see a little bit of a dip. I believe we talked about this when the weather changed in the fall as well, with the much cooler mornings, much warmer evenings, which we had a lot of in April. We just see a lot of movement and expansion of different items, and so we end up getting a few more road calls than we're used to. We will see that even out a little bit throughout the year. And then again, 70 of 70 preventive inspections, so great job to Chris's folks. As you can see, I am not Randolph Williams, but I will also be sharing paratransit information with you. Do you all have any questions about the fixed route information before we move forward?
No, my only comment was the same comment last time, is that we're, for the year, almost 400,000 rides down for the year.
So for paratransit, we did have an increase in ridership on the service in April, hitting 15,000 rides for the total for the month, and about 12,000 on weekday. So everything is essentially equivalent to last year. It's a little bit higher, but not a ton. And then there were 4 preventable accidents, and although that's higher than we've seen for paratransit over the last year, it's still very, very typical for what we saw in 24 as well. Moving on to the on-time performance. With our audited on-time performance, we reached 81% for the month. So just a little bit more information about that. We've talked about the auditing has helped us to move, and we've been seeing it move up every time. So I wanted to say a huge thank you to the RATP Dev staff, the corporate team that have been working with us. Randolph Williams and Catherine Moran have had a huge hand in looking at this data over and over and over again, scouring it, reconciling a number of trips. And that has really helped us get to that 81%. It's a huge achievement. It's a great mile marker. However, the work is not done. The goal is 90, but we're going to continue to watch the ebbs and flows and see how things change. And as Randolph and I were going through this information yesterday, we were looking at some interesting trends, so I think he's going to have some more information for you all next month on that. So a couple of things about April. RETP Dev did add one new administrative staff member, and that person assists with scheduling, dispatching, that sort of thing. They began a new driver schedule, or what we call a run bid, on April 20th with some improvements to the staffing schedules to accommodate those busy times of day. They were fully staffed through the entire month of April. And then there was a significant collaboration with the corporate team to identify issues and further refine the reconciliation process. And additionally, we've seen about a 90% decrease in complaints since we held the listening sessions. Any questions?
I'll go back to fixed route. What feedback are you getting on High Street?
What feedback are we getting on High Street? That still getting, like, I'm surprised you guys pulled this off the way you did. It's gone way more smoothly than I anticipated. So still good. Staff have been very accommodating to sort of as detours change and that sort of thing. 4th of July is going to be fun for all with just the way the road closures happen and that sort of thing. But things have been going exceedingly well. Staff have been really collaborative. They've been really thoughtful. They've been very communicative to customers, and so we've heard a lot of good things and not a lot of significant negative feedback.
Feels like we've settled in a little,
Yeah.
little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I
We did.
pass it every morning, it looks great.
Yeah, we added
Except when
some.
it rains, because.
We added some benches, and we're still working on a sort of semi or permanent shade and rain coverage situation between wind, property ownership, shade, that sort of thing, without sort of covering the entirety of the sidewalk in a very permanent way. It is a more complicated situation than I think any of us could have initially. All of the ideas that we've had have not yet come to fruition in a meaningful way.
So no solution as of today?
No current solution, but we're still exploring various options.
We have got seating. Seating has improved, right?
Yeah.
Say that again?
Seating has
How many-
improved,
5
yeah.
benches that you put up there?
5 right now, we've got 10 more coming back in, different sizes.
But, and then I was specifically talking about the shade for the summer.
Yes, we're still working on solutions for that, yep. For a shade and sort of like a rain cover situation, both.
Who's the property owner?
Well, there's the sidewalk, and then Lex Park owns the wall that's the side of the garage.
Then across the street too.
Across the street there's the Calvary Baptist, and there's a UK-owned parking lot.
I mean, same side of High Street, across the next street.
The same side of High Street.
CK Park,
Still Lex Park.
right?
Yeah, both sides of the garage, and then are you talking across Beck Alley?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who is that? Hickson Bunsen, I believe, owns that? Yeah. I think they're the tenant who owns the parking situation in the main building.
Anyway, it looks very well organized.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Huge undertaking by staff. It wasn't nearly as chaotic as I think that any of us had mentally prepared for, but everybody's done a really good job pivoting, and especially like our transportation supervisors, our customer service supervisor, and all of the operations staff. Chris's team and the service workers have jumped in and definitely like given information sort of beyond their typical knowledge base, and it's been really great it's a really great group to be proud of.
Anything else? Thank you.
Good morning. I think it's still morning. We are looking at 10 months through the fiscal year for the month of April. Our operating cash is very similar to this time last year. We had some grant funds come in, so It's very similar to last year. Accounts receivable, as I mentioned last month, will show a credit. We have a year-end adjustment to do for that. We will move some of the money from work in process up to cash. So when the year is over, part of the work in process money, part of that is also the transit center expenses. So we can keep track of those through the year end. Everything else on the balance sheet is pretty normal. It's pretty similar to last year, but I'll be glad to answer any questions. Okay, statement of revenue and expenses. Property taxes, we have exceeded our budget for this year. We are a little bit over budget, $268,000 over budget, and so that's looking promising. We've continue to receive some funding in May. We probably won't see much for June, but our passenger revenue. I thought it was interesting that we had talked about passenger revenue and passengers pretty much staying flat when we talked about the budget. And as you'll see, the passenger revenue is $4,000 over this time last year. So we are a little bit under budget, but we are at least where we were this time last year. Federal funding remains the same. We're still waiting on some federal funding to come in. Our wages and fringe pretty much cancel each other out. Our wages are over, our fringe is under, pretty much cancels each other out there. Professional services, we can still have some vehicles that are being worked on and some facility items that we'll be doing for the spring. Materials and supplies, it's actually looking better than it has been. It's still over budget, but for the month of April it was 127, which was actually less than we thought it was going to be at this time because of the increase in parts. Our diesel and CNG fuel are looking really good. Our monthly average for diesel was $2.18. Our year-to-date average since July was $2.37, and our CNG was $1.24. So we're always happy to see that. Our paratransit expenses are still under budget, and the media advertising will pick some of that up with the May and June when we've done some of the transit center advertising and things will come out of that money, but we haven't. It's not in the April. But I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. I think we're in a really good spot right now, so I'm very pleased.
Thank you, Nikki.
Okay, thank you.
I think we'll move on to the change order report.
So I've got 4 change orders to report this month. 3 of those do with construction projects, and the first 2 are the transit center. So when we did the demolition of the transit center, we noticed that the prior construction, they had built the walls and then poured the floor, which meant that the entirety of the floor was uneven throughout the structure. And so in order to fix that, we had to do a change order. That's the first one, $36,880 to level the floor throughout the transit center, so we can go back and then build the walls appropriately on a level floor. The second is dealing with the roof of the transit center. When we did the demo, we noticed that roof drains were missing. In order to put those roof drains in and bring everything up to code, that's an additional $12,440. The third change order is to our Tecton construction, our maintenance facility construction project, which is the wall support from our architectural team to ensure that the structure is there, which is a change of $6,191.72. So I'll pause there on the construction change orders and see if there are any questions on those.
When we say we noticed, who's the we?
On the transit center, that generally comes from the foreman and the contractors team. That would run that back to the architect and come together on a solution that would be presented to us, and we would decide collectively how to move forward. But yeah, like the floors, we would have no idea that was the case, the existing condition, until everything got pulled out.
What were the walls sitting on?
They were sitting, you could see the trenches, like when they built the walls and they pulled them out, right? It was.
I believe they put walls in and then poured a 2-inch cap over top of after the walls.
Okay, so there was a structural slab and then topping slab.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So So we've had to basically fill in those trenches.
Yes.
Got it.
So these first two are pretty minor.
Yeah, I think all of them are fairly minor. There will be others that we've noticed, so some structural support that we're working on, that'll be in next month. And possibly one other that deals with the roof, that has to do with fire code. We're working on a recommendation on that. So there will be others, but we think that the floor is probably the biggest ticket one.
What was our total budget for the renovation?
$3 million. $3 million?
Wait, our total budget was 3 million? Oh, right.
Yep.
What was our original total budget? 1.5?
Yeah, well, it was all lumped together with the interior and the exterior, so.
Okay.
About the non-construction.
So is the other 500,000, is that all contingency?
Not all of it. Some of it will be towards like the Lex Park lease for the space on High Street. The Schiller work, which is our communications or our door access control, that was outside of the scope of the contractor.
Okay.
But none of that is to a level that's going to put us over budget.
Got it.
So the fourth change order is maintenance uniforms. We did an RFP and we did not receive a responsive proposal. So we will add 180 days to the existing contract to give the procurement team time to do another RFP. Is that a fair statement?
Did we get feedback as to why there were no bids?
A lot of people were late on the bids, so some even asked for continuations to it to turn them in.
Okay, so they intended to bid, they just missed the deadline? Okay. Yeah.
And that's all I have for change orders.
Okay. Any old business?
Nope.
Any new business?
Nope.
Proposed agenda items?
There are two that I did not put on the agenda. One comes from the findings yesterday from City Council and the $250,000 allocated for a downtown circulator project. We are trying to get everything together to purchase the vehicles for that project before the existing contract for paratransit vehicles expires at the end of June. So we're working to get that on our agenda for next month. And we will have a nominating committee next month as well. So we need to time everything. So at the July meeting, we formally nominate our leadership.
All right. Seeing no further need for closed session, we will stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.